Welcome back, everyone. This is, so to moderate this session, let me introduce you to Peter McLaughlin, who is one of ConnectAID's community advocates and also a student at Harvard University.
Thank you, Gail. I just wanted to introduce our speakers for this session. So here we have Dr. Richard Munang, who is an author and currently the African Regional Climate Change Coordinator at the UN Environment Programme. He has over 16 years of experience targeting key regional and global issues of climate change policy, environmental management, and sustainable development. Boaz Paldi is a global engagement and partnership manager at UNDP and a communications expert leading major international organizations in outreach campaigns and public relation needs. He currently leads the Lion's Share Fund, an innovative new conservation fund that allows advertisers to donate part of their share of their media spend on any advert that includes images of animals. And finally, we have Felix Dodds, who is an author, futurist, activist, and sustainable development consultant who has been instrumental in developing new modes of stakeholder engagement with the United Nations, particularly with the field of sustainable development. We are very excited to announce that Felix has agreed to become a new ambassador of ConnectAID. So thank you very much, Felix. And just to the audience, we have a question. So just put in the chat, what is your favorite SDG or cause? Please type it in so we can see. And so now Gail will be moderating this section.
Thank you. First, I'd like to say that Richard, I love your outfit. I don't know if it's a jewelry or it's really nice. What is it?
Yeah, thank you very much, Gail. This is from the western part of Cameroon because that's where I come from. So it just represents love and kindness.
Where are you speaking? Where are you located at the moment?
Nairobi, Kenya.
Nairobi, Kenya. Boaz, you are in New York?
I'm in New York, but I'm from Nairobi, Kenya.
Okay, wonderful. And you, Felix?
I'm in Apex, North Carolina, but I have been to Nairobi many times.
So let's start with a serious question. This will be to Felix Dodds. Felix, you have participated, we're so lucky to have you here. You have actually participated in the conceptualization of the Sustainable Development Goals. Could you please explain to us how the SDGs came about and in what way they're different from what it used to be called the Millennium Development Goals?
I will, but I think Richard and I should have, a moment of silence for the 3 weeks we've just attended at the UNFCCC in different time zones. It has been challenging. I'm sure you'd agree, Richard. So just to give you a little bit of backdrop, I attended the informal meeting for Rio Plus 20 in July 2011 in Solo, Indonesia. And it was at that meeting that Paulo Caballero from Colombia presented the idea more formally into the discussion for the preparation for Rio Plus 20. And it seemed to me at the very beginning, once I heard her suggest that we were on a track towards Sustainable Development Goals by 2015. I had the pleasure of chairing the UN conference Sustainable Societies Responsive Citizens in September 2011, so just 2 months later. And we reorganized the outcome from that meeting, which had 1,400 stakeholders attending it, to come out with a set of SDGs. And we came out with 17 SDGs. They're not the same, but it's the same number. So we were clearly ahead of our time. And what we then did, as I was working with Stakeholder Forum, which I ran at that time, is I worked to support Paulo Caballero. I attended the first government retreat on the SDGs held in Colombia in November 2011, and the only document that was being shared with ideas of what the SDGs should be were from the UN conference that I chaired. And what was fascinating at the time was the attitude of the development community to the SDGs. They were against it. And so you had the development departments, you had the development NGOs who opposed the idea of the SDGs, as they were thinking that what we would have was the MDGs plus at that time. And some of the differences are quite obvious from the beginning. It was that it was going to address economic, environment, and development issues. It was going to be for all countries. And one of the key differences between the SDGs and the MDGs was, and in a sense, Helen alluded to it. She said she went to the Millennium Summit, but it was then the UN that actually selected internally the SDGs, and there were a lot of complaints about that for two reasons. One, that we had the conferences of the 1990s that had developed action plans, and to some extent they were put aside, and we then focused on a much smaller agenda, 8 goals, and I think that was, I mean, it meant that a lot of the work that had gone into those particular conferences were not realized. And the second thing is that NGOs didn't get involved, or stakeholders didn't get involved in the decision-making process for those goals. Compare that to the SDGs, where there was a huge involvement of stakeholders. It is the most participatory process that we have seen, I think, to date, as far as if you had an issue that you cared about, then it's likely that your voice could be heard. It might not be that it was agreed, but your voice was definitely able to be heard. There were, I think UNDP organized something like 120 national consultations in developing countries. You know, you had 2 high-level panels that inputted to it. And then you had the open working group, which also, in a sense, set the SDGs at the end of 2014. And if my memory is right, that Save the Children Fund opposed the SDGs right up to the last meeting of the OWG. And so, you know, the development community didn't understand that this was a bigger agenda, that we couldn't just deal with development. So I think that was very important. So I'll stop there.
That's very, very interesting. Richard Munang, so I'd like to talk a little bit about, because the theme of this session is sustainability reset, how we can how COVID-19 has changed everything in a way. So how do you think COVID has changed the way we communicate?
Yeah, thank you very much, Gail. The reality of the challenges that we faced with this pandemic called COVID, I mean, is visible to each and every one of us. But I'll put this in perspective using an African proverb, which says, a man who invokes a storm for his people can't prevent his house from destruction. That means, from what we are seeing from COVID, it's a global pandemic. No one is immune to it. Countries, sovereignty of states doesn't matter anymore. And also speaking, climate change is at the verge of becoming the next pandemic, but unfortunately, there is no cure. But what we've seen with COVID is that the solutions to the problem are not only with governments alone, they are with everyone. And therefore, the communication, especially in social media spaces, have to be with everyone. And what we communicate matters. A study which was done in one African country showed that 92% of those who were interviewed actually indicated that they went to social media to get information about COVID, about solutions, about updates. And that then means that the communication has changed, because social media is moving away from just being a socialization space to be a space where solutions can actually be tapped. But what is the underlying factor is that we must be able then to bring solutions, and not just solutions, but solutions that can touch lives of many people.
I have a question for Boaz Paldi. So Boaz, you're from UNDP. You're here also representing Ulrika Moder, and we heard her talk about the situation of COVID and explain the importance of getting out of our silos to communicate about the sustainable development. How would you recommend that all UN agencies and nonprofits get out of their echo chamber to talk about poverty, about climate change, about education, and so on?
I think what's important is to be audience-centric. We need to engage with our audience. The UN, many NGOs, CSOs tend to talk and not listen. And so the new mode of communication has to be interaction. It has to be engagement. It has to be the fact that we listen and talk, but not only listen. And I think that's the vital part of this. We need to give people voice and agency. We need to give people the ability to become part of the discussion, to be part of the decision making. We need to connect between people and policymakers, and that is it's not an easy job, but it's the job that the UN has to do, and that's what the UN communication. I think it's not only the UN. It's a lot of the players out there. We need to turn towards engagement. Social media gives us the ability to connect. It gives us the ability to listen, and we need to embrace that wholeheartedly. But even go further. There is lots and lots and lots of technology out there that can help us with engagement. There's ways that we can bring people in. I think Felix mentioned the idea of the SDGs, that it was so everyone got engaged with that. We had millions of people giving opinions about what the SDGs should actually be, and that's a good lesson to learn. Not enough. I mean, I think we could have done better, but it's a road that we're traveling on. But the SDGs are in fact the most inclusive process that the UN has ever ran, and that's the lesson that we all need to learn. We all need to be inclusive. We need to listen. We need to bring in people's opinions. That's the vital ingredient to moving forward, I think.
Could I just come back on that? I mean, because it's an amusing story. So the My World survey listed a number of what were about 17 goals or whatever, but it had an other section. And in the other section, those that cared about animal welfare put in animal welfare. And at one point, it was running, I think, second on the survey. And then UNDP took down the other and excluded the opportunity to put a different goal down. And the goal that came last, if my memory was, in 2015, when the survey closed, the last goal, the one which got the least number of people voting for it, was climate.
Interesting. So actually, Felix, what is your vision of how the world is going to evolve after COVID? I think you actually wrote a book about that, right?
I did. I've written a book called Tomorrow's People and New Technology, Changing Our Lives, and it will be out in October. And we looked at 2030, and one of the lessons we learned from climate change was you can't just give negative messages to people. It may help, it can't be the last chance again. Copenhagen was the last chance for climate change, and then Paris, and now it's Glasgow. And in the end, people think, well, I might as well party if it's the last chance. And so you've got to give them positive messages. And so the book looks at what life will be in 2030, but at the background, it looks at how the SDGs and climate will be framed by new technology. And so the Internet of Things, blockchain, new energy sources, things like AI. And so the hope is that we can give a positive view because there is going to be a huge change in the job market. And a lot of people who we call blue collar workers will have to move or transition away from the work that they're doing. And one of the successes that I think in the way that governments are looking at the recovery packages is investing in new technology. And many of that new technology will require blue collar workers in their countries to enact those. And so it gives us about a 10-year opportunity to move people from jobs that they were doing, which they no longer will have, into jobs which they have a skill base for, without being threatening. Because I think President Biden in his State of the Union message said the next 10 years will be like 50 years of development.
Yeah. I wanted to ask this question to Richard. It's a bit jumping to another subject, but it's very important that you talk to us about this because you're a very strong advocate of volunteers in Africa. and volunteering online is also a way to take action. So how can people do online volunteerism for social good, beside volunteering for ConnectAID, of course?
Yeah, thanks again, Gail. As we're speaking today, in just the past 4 months, 521 million new subscribers in social media has happened. That's about 16 and a half persons joining every second and spending a year over billions of hours on social media. What is that telling us? Social media has democratized opportunities. Yes. And when you look at this and you take it back to Africa, we have a population of over 60% youthful, and at the same time, 60% unemployed. And most of these youth are on social media. And what we have noticed is that if we can leverage on their passion and show some level of inspiration, we can actually usher them to action. And we practically did this by using what we call innovative volunteerism, just a hashtag that we started on Twitter, engage thousands of young people where they were inspired to see climate action as an investment opportunity and do carry out simple climate action solutions where they can be able to solve problems in community. So the key point is that volunteering is not just about institutions, because information has been democratized and is not an exclusive business affair anymore. It is inclusive for everyone. We can actually be able to leverage social media to connect with more people and at the same time also learn about simple techniques that can be able to address communities' challenges. Let's just take example. We have 600,000 people dying every year in the African continent as a result of indoor pollution because it depends on charcoal. But the young people are actually learning using YouTube, connecting with people online, using Twitter to learn how to turn agricultural waste to briquettes that are reducing indoor pollution. These are realities. And because of the opportunity of social media, they can connect with others in different countries. We are seeing young people in Kenya training youth in Ghana, in Nigeria, in Cameroon, in Togo, to develop simple solar dryers. And that is building their skills and helping them usher themselves to solve community problems and build climate resilience. But the first thing is we must use social media to inspire young people to see themselves as solution providers and not complainers. We must be able to ensure that at least we bring solutions, not only gossip on social media, but we make social media to be a space, that mosaic space of solutions, not complaining.
Yeah, so it really goes very well with what Helen was saying before. I mean, if we are to summarize, we were saying use your voice, volunteer online, donate online if you can, and also I wanted to talk about misinformation, because that's something that we've heard a lot during COVID, and that's something that I can ask Boaz and Felix to respond both. How do you think we can counter misinformation and influence others as an international collective taking action online for the SDGs? Felix.
So I think we've got some examples of where what I would call interlocutors have been set up, and I think we need more interlocutors. So in the UK, to deal with the misinformation that was going into the media on climate change, an organization was set up called the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit by Richard Black, who was the former BBC environment correspondent. And what they looked at was misinformation and supporting journalists, parliamentarians, and other communicators, so the communication family we're talking, with accurate and accessible briefings on key climate and energy issues. And I think we need the similar types of things for the SDGs, where you've got people who've worked in the media, whether it's social media or whether it's traditional media, who can help in national context to be able to deal with any misinformation. So what Richard would do during, like we have just attended the UNFCCC informals, if there was anything going out on the media that was indicating that things were not good, and there has been, we have a new channel in the UK called, I think, I don't know what it's called, Great Britain or something, and it's a new TV channel, a bit like Fox, and they were putting out or questioning some of the stuff on climate change. Richard's organization was then putting out information on all the platforms, social and traditional, that was able to deal with that misinformation. And I think that we need that kind of thing in many of the, particularly in the top 20 emitters for climate change, but with the SDGs in key countries as well.
What would you think, Boaz?
I think it's a huge problem. I think, if I had to kind of rate the problems of the world as we're facing now, for me, of course, climate change is always looming and an incredibly difficult issue to deal with. For me, the second most difficult issue that we have to deal with is this post-truth world that we are living in. And I think, social media plays a huge part of that. And the main platforms, of course, play a huge part of it. I think I don't know if there is one silver bullet for this. I think there's many solutions. It needs to come also from governments. We need kind of governments to be truth tellers. We need I'm a former journalist. When I was a journalist, we always felt that we were the absolute arbitrators of truth because we were not in any way influenced by anything outside of what we're seeing and what we're reporting. I worked for Reuters for a very, very long time, and we prided ourselves as being absolutely true. We had to have three sources for every piece of information that we ever put on the wire. I remember once I was in Jerusalem and there was an earthquake and the walls were shaking and there was cracks in the walls, but I still needed to confirm with another source that there was in fact an earthquake. And that was the level of truth that was out there. That is slowly being eroded by social media. It's being eroded in the worst possible way. Facebook doesn't have an editorial board, neither does Twitter. They are the main source of information for news these days, and it's a problem. We saw that very clearly in various elections around the world, and I think what we need is that large institutions and governments need to play a very, very active role in this. We need to take on that role of truth arbitrators, and really kind of try and somehow build systems that would verify what is true and what is not true. We see incredible misinformation about COVID-19 happening all the time until today. It hasn't waned at all. You see that on social media all the time. You see misinformation about variety of elections around the world. It's a very daunting task. I don't have a very easy answer for you. I just recognize it as a huge problem that we'll have to face, all of us together, and try and find the path back towards a truth reality.
Just wanted to come in on that. I think that one of the things is it's a media, and we've not treated it as a media. And we need to have proper regulations in countries that deal with the kind of things that you can put in, whether or not we have it for traditional media, or at least in the UK we do. I think President Reagan took it away from people in the United States. But I think we need proper regulation that says you can't be racist, you can't do certain things on there, and there has to be rights of reply and all the kinds of things that we would expect for any form of media. We have a big problem coming down the road, which is kind of hit the media last year, which is deep fake, where I can take a picture of you and put it on something that you are not doing, and it looks like you have said something or you have done something. And the ability of doing that has to be regulated soon. One final thing on Richard, on volunteers. Volunteers were added as a UN major group in the 2030 agenda, and so they now have a really important role and a seat at the table, as do women, youth, and others in helping to promote and deliver the SDGs.
Yeah, but for example, what do you say to climate activists who talk about the climate and then they get kicked out of some social media because those who report them end up having more power than those who support them, which is just a like or a comment. But, because it's so easy with the algorithms to report someone. So if you're against climate change, for example, it's so easy to report a comment, if you're against doing good. So how can we give more power to those who do good than to those who?
Well, so I've had some issues around
Me
Facebook.
too.
Yeah, but the point is, I challenged them, and within a day they'd come back, and so so there was a time thing. But that's why I think we need specific legislation in countries which explain what they can and can't do, and then we're going to see algorithms dominating social media even more as we move forward. But if you've got legislation that to some extent that will help to define that, and you can't leave it to the private companies to do this. It has to be done by the government, which is what I think Boaz has been suggesting. Yeah. And I think the UN plays a role here in bringing people together to have that conversation. It's done it in a number of other areas in the past, and I think we absolutely need it, because we've also got things like robots coming down the road. I mean, you can get a dog robot now which will basically attack you. The army is producing robotics that are going to replace humans as soldiers, and I mean, we have no place for that conversation at the moment to happen, to build in regulation before these new technologies have a huge impact on our lives and our democracies and our freedoms.
Richard, are you gone, or there's something wrong with your audio, with your video? Try to log back in. Yeah, we try to log back in. We'll ask a question to Boaz. Oh yeah. So Boaz, COVID. Yeah. So just to come back to COVID, it touches a lot of SDG related issues. What lessons have we learned from this experience that we went through, and how do we move forward? How do we build better?
I think inherently within the COVID crisis, which is so horrible and devastated our lives so much, there's also opportunity. We saw in the beginning of the COVID crisis how the world could change. We saw in April of 2020 that we essentially changed our ways of lives overnight, and really kind of like had a transformational change across the world. That's what we need to do for the crises we face in climate and nature. We need to make transformational behavioral changes. The reason why it was easy with COVID was because it was an active threat that people could feel and see, and it affected them. Climate change has never been that. Felix earlier on mentioned in the chats that in 2005 no one really thought that climate change was the next big thing. We know now that climate change is the next big thing, and we need to have the same transformational behavioral change on climate that we did on COVID-19. COVID-19 is going to be a walk in the park compared to what we are facing with climate change. But there's still time to change that, but we just need to do it. And so what COVID taught us in many ways is that we can change if we want to change. And if the threat is big enough, we will change. So what I would hope is that we don't go back to business as usual. What I would hope is that everyone, governments, corporations, people, think about the changes that they could make and be bold about it, and be bold about how we're going to address the next big crisis right now. For years we've been talking about the pandemic that was going to hit, and yet we weren't ready. So what I would hope is that COVID really teaches us a lesson that we need to be ready. We need to be ready now for the crises that are coming, and that we can do it. Humanity coming together, within 1 year, we had a vaccination for COVID-19. It's incredible. It's like, to me, a non-scientist, that's like a medical miracle that happened. And that's all of us coming together and really working together to solve an issue. The same is true for every other issue we face. But what I think the opportunity is here is that we saw that it's doable. We saw that it can be done, and if we all work together, the United Nations, the rest of the NGOs and CSOs out there, all put our heads together for a single solution or a single crisis, or for solutions, we will be able to do it. So I take positivity from it.
Just two quick things. In the last 2 days, 50 of the records in the United States on the temperatures have been broken. We've seen massive hikes in temperature of 120 degrees in places like Phoenix. And so it's bringing to the American public the realities of that. We're seeing droughts in those particular states that are being affected, where kind of whole lakes are disappearing, or rivers. So I think that it's becoming more clear that it's not something too far in the future. And one of the things I've called for, because we have now a number of net zero coalitions, the ones run out of the Climate Champions run one, which deals with companies and stakeholders committing. But what we need are national climate net zero coalitions in the 20 top emitters. And those need to be predominantly local, subnational, and industry stakeholders. The others are important, but those are the ones that need to start to set their targets. And I think one of the most important changes that's happened in the last year has been at the Biden Climate Summit, when we saw the announcement of the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero. If the market is changing and the funds are going away from coal and oil and moving to renewables, then I think we're at the process of being able to really have change.
If I may just throw one more thing in there, I agree with Felix 100%. One more action that I'd like us to all take and think about, and governments, particularly policymakers, to take. Let's get rid of fossil fuel subsidies. It's time. They serve no one. They skew the economy towards fossil fuels and against renewables. It's time the world got rid of them. It's a first step in a very, very long road, but it's an absolutely essential step.
Yeah, just think one thing to you as UNDP, though. In certain places, that were like in Egypt, if they took away the fossil fuel subsidy, the food prices would go through the roof. So how do you deal with that transition?
I think, the way to deal with that transition would be to have a fair and equitable transition where we take away the funds from fossil fuel subsidies and we put them into social protection. We put them into UBI schemes, we put them into TBI schemes, we put them into green jobs, we enhance the economy, we give back the funds that would go to fossil fuel subsidies in the form of social protection. And I think that's a way that many countries can deal with it. Again, it's not a silver bullet. There's lots of different areas that we could work on, but I think that's the one way that we at UNDP see moving forward to have an equitable green transition.
I'd like to ask the last question to you, Richard. What tips would you share with us on how to bring, for example, climate action at the forefront of public discussions? And also, I saw from the audience, I saw a question: What tips would you give to teenagers who want to engage with the Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah, thank you very much, Gail, and I'll build on what colleagues have already said. It's one word: narrative. Narrative. Your narrative matters, and it should be a narrative of socio-economic opportunities. People don't really care much about talking. We mentioned climate change and its impact. They care about putting food on the table, especially the young generation. Like I said, 60% youthful. They spend 3 hours daily on social media looking for information. But we should leverage social media to tell them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. And with climate change, leveraging climate change as a socio-economic opportunity and as an investment opportunity, not only a silo regulatory aspect, will showcase exactly what are the opportunities that young people can tap into. And we are seeing this across our work in the continent. We are engaging youth, leveraging on simple climate action solution of solar dryers, decentralizing to communities, are helping mothers in villages dry their food and reducing post-harvest losses. So the key word is narrative. What you focus on will attract audience to you. Your narrative of solutions and narrative of socio-economic opportunities is actually the way to go. And it's the same for the SDGs, talking about them from an opportunity perspective, not only talking about it from an impact perspective. When we show the value in terms of socio-economic opportunity, people flock to it. But when we focus only on the aspects of its impact, then we lose the generation because the appetite is about creating jobs and also opportunities for themselves.
Thank you. And this is a nice transition when we're talking about youth. ConnectAID has interviewed some children that are SDG advocates. Of course, we didn't ask them to come for this conference and speak live because there's a 7-year-old and a 16-year-old. So we have interviewed them, and we'll show you a 3-minute video. Boaz, Felix, Richard, it has been an honor to have you here. We hope that next year because this summit is the first of a series of summits for taking action online and for encouraging people. And I think we're really creating a community of change makers, and this is really incredible. So thank you, everyone.